January 1945. Snow drifts silently across the frozen grounds of a remote American POW camp in Europe. The wind bites through worn coats and carries the faint echo of distant artillery. Inside the gray barracks, German women huddle on narrow wooden bunks, hands wrapped around mugs of bitter tea, eyes hollow from months of captivity. The world outside rages with war, yet here time feels suspended, marked only by the distant clang of boots and the occasional sharp call of a guard. Then, unexpectedly, a note hangs in the cold air, light, delicate, defiant. A piano, standing incongruously in the corner, comes alive beneath American fingers. The sound reverberates through the barracks, ricocheting off frost-coated walls. Faces that once wore exhaustion and fear freeze in disbelief. Some cover their mouths, others inch closer, drawn by a memory of home, a memory of music long forgotten. For a moment, the war's shadow recedes, replaced by a fragile, fleeting harmony. The German women are stunned, caught between disbelief and the fragile comfort of a melody that speaks of humanity, even in captivity. In that instant, a quiet rebellion of hope takes root, one note at a time. By late 1944, the tide of World War II had turned decisively against Germany. The Allies had stormed across France following D-Day, pushing eastward, while Soviet forces pressed from the east, squeezing the Reich from both sides. The destruction of cities, railways, and supply lines left millions displaced. Among them were soldiers, civilians, and, increasingly, women caught in the machinery of war. German female prisoners, though fewer in number than their male counterparts, represented a unique and often overlooked aspect of the conflict. Many had served in auxiliary roles: nurses, clerks, communication staff, and anti-aircraft personnel. Some were young women swept up in the tide of conscription. Others volunteers bound by ideology or circumstance, captured by advancing American units. These women were transported to camps in the Allied-controlled zones, often hundreds of miles from home. Their arrival was met with a rigid structure: roll calls at dawn, assigned barracks, and strict adherence to military regulations. The United States, adhering to the 1929 Geneva Convention, ensured that prisoners received basic food, medical care, and shelter. Yet, conditions were austere, particularly during the harsh European winter. Heat was minimal, rations were simple, and the constant uncertainty of the front lines weighed heavily on minds already strained by fear and homesickness. Life in the camp followed a strict rhythm. Morning work details, laundry, kitchen assignments, and occasional tasks in camp gardens or workshops punctuated the long hours. Leisure, when permitted, was scarce. Reading materials were limited. Conversations were constrained by language barriers and fear, and isolation compounded the psychological toll. Letters from home, infrequent and heavily censored, became lifelines to a world the women had been severed from. Each day blurred into the next, a series of gray, repetitive hours punctuated only by the occasional inspection or the arrival of new prisoners. Despite the routine, the American Guards maintained an atmosphere of cautious civility. Officers were trained to enforce rules with firmness but avoid cruelty, reflecting both policy and practical necessity. The goal was to maintain order, prevent unrest, and, crucially, prepare prisoners for eventual repatriation. While some guards treated their charges with compassion, others remained indifferent or distant, creating a spectrum of experiences for the women inside the barracks. It was in this structured yet humanized environment that small moments, rare glimpses of art, music, or humor, could have disproportionate emotional impact. The psychological state of the German women was fragile, cut off from family, stripped of agency, and surrounded by the unfamiliar rhythms of captivity. Fear and uncertainty were constant companions. Many had witnessed the collapse of their homeland, the bombing of cities, and the deaths of neighbors or comrades. Rumors of atrocities, shifting front lines, and the fates of their male relatives fueled anxiety. In this atmosphere, even minor deviations from routine, an extra meal, a kind word, a melody from a piano, could spark hope, momentarily lifting spirits and fostering a sense of connection to life beyond the barbed wire. It was against this backdrop of structured routine, constrained liberty, and profound psychological strain that the piano was introduced into the camp. Not merely an instrument, it became a symbol of normalcy, a fragment of the world the women had lost. Its presence challenged expectations that war was solely about conflict, discipline, and survival. Here was something unarmed, unthreatening, yet capable of piercing the layers of fear and fatigue accumulated over months of captivity. The arrival of music, even in such a small and controlled form, was not an accident. It reflected a deliberate understanding by the American officers that morale, mental health, and cultural engagement were integral to humane treatment. In these early months of 1945, as snow blanketed the camp and war raged on distant fronts, the stage was set for a moment that would ripple through the barracks. The German women, accustomed to strict schedules, isolation, and the ever-present shadow of defeat, were about to encounter an unexpected gesture. A piano, an invitation to play, and the faint, fragile echo of freedom. The treatment of prisoners in American-run camps was guided by both international law and practical considerations. Under the 1929 Geneva Convention, POWs were entitled to humane treatment, adequate food, shelter, and medical care. The U.S. military, aware of global scrutiny and the moral implications of mistreatment, maintained strict oversight to ensure compliance. Officers and camp administrators were trained to balance discipline with empathy, understanding that a prisoner's cooperation often depended on the respect and decency extended to them. Within this framework, recreational activities and cultural engagement were not mere luxuries. They were tools of order. Mental health and even diplomacy, music, in particular, held a unique place in the daily life of camps. Pianos, records, and other instruments were often available, sometimes provided by the Red Cross or brought by sympathetic guards. American commanders recognized that the emotional toll of war and imprisonment could be mitigated through structured leisure. The arts offered prisoners a temporary escape from the monotony and anxiety of camp life, a reminder of identity, home, and humanity. For female prisoners, who were frequently isolated from the male-dominated military environment, these opportunities carried even greater weight, offering a rare avenue for expression and emotional release. Introducing a piano into a barracks required careful planning. The instrument had to be maintained in the cold, dry conditions of winter, often transported across muddy or icy terrain. Guards assigned to music duty monitored sessions, ensuring that the activity remained orderly and non-disruptive to daily routines. Yet, within these constraints, the piano offered a profound sense of freedom. Its keys, once pressed, could evoke landscapes, memories, and emotions inaccessible in the rigid confines of camp life. For German women, many of whom had grown up in households where music was central, hearing the notes rekindled a connection to a world they feared lost forever. This gesture of allowing prisoners to play music was not only practical, but subtly strategic. By fostering goodwill and providing constructive outlets, American officers reduced tension and potential unrest. A prisoner engaged in a creative activity was less likely to resist authority or succumb to despair. Moreover, these programs underscored a broader ethical message. Even amid the brutality of war, humanity could be preserved. This approach contrasted sharply with the harsher practices of some other nations, highlighting a deliberate commitment to humane treatment that went beyond legal obligation. For the prisoners themselves, the psychological impact was immediate and profound. Music offered structure and rhythm in a life defined by monotony and restriction. The piano became a silent confidant, capable of expressing grief, nostalgia, and fleeting joy. Women who had spent months in quiet despair found themselves tentatively experimenting with chords, improvising melodies, or simply listening. The sound of a familiar tune, folk songs, classical pieces, or popular German melodies evoked memories of home, childhood, and family. These brief interludes of normalcy fostered camaraderie among the prisoners, reinforcing shared identity and resilience. The broader context of late 1944 and early 1945 also amplified the significance of these moments. The war was nearing its final chaotic stages. News of German defeats, civilian suffering, and shifting front lines filtered into the camps, often bringing anxiety and fear. In this environment, a piano became more than an instrument. It was a rare anchor to stability, culture, and hope. For the American Guards, witnessing the reactions of the prisoners reinforced the importance of these programs, offering proof that small acts of humanity could transcend language, ideology, and circumstance. Thus, the scene was set for an extraordinary convergence. The rigid world of POW life, meeting the liberating, humanizing power of music. The arrival of a piano in the barracks was not merely a footnote in camp administration, it was a catalyst for transformation. In a place defined by discipline and confinement, the first notes struck against frozen walls would soon resonate deeply, revealing the resilience of the human spirit and the unexpected bonds forged in captivity. For the German female prisoners, the piano represented something almost unimaginable, a fragment of normal life within a world defined by war and captivity. Many were teenagers or young women, suddenly removed from their homes, families, and communities. The daily routine of roll calls, chores, and endless waiting left little room for personal expression or emotional release. When the first notes rang out across the frost-lined barracks, faces hardened by fear and fatigue softened. Some wept quietly, memories of home and family flooding back with each chord. Others were drawn tentatively toward the instrument, fingers hovering over keys they had once mastered as children, hesitant to believe such freedom could exist in this place. In these moments, the piano was more than music. It was a bridge to their humanity, a reminder that they were still individuals, not merely prisoners. The American officers who authorized the piano's use displayed a quiet but deliberate form of leadership. Decisions in POW camps were never casual. Every act had consequences for morale, order, and the broader perception of American conduct. Allowing prisoners to engage in music was a calculated risk. Officers understood that it could foster goodwill and cooperation, easing tensions while upholding the Geneva Convention's standards. At the same time, they needed to ensure that the activity remained controlled, preventing disruption or potential misuse. By permitting the piano sessions, these leaders demonstrated an understanding of psychological strategy. A small concession, executed thoughtfully, could yield disproportionate results in human morale and camp harmony. From a tactical standpoint, music was an unexpected but effective tool in camp management. Engaged prisoners were less likely to resist authority or succumb to despair. The piano offered a constructive outlet for emotion, reducing the likelihood of unrest or conflict. Moreover, its presence reinforced routine and structure in a subtle, positive way. Guards could maintain discipline without resorting to harsh measures because prisoners, absorbed in music, were calmer, cooperative, and focused on personal or communal expression. In a context where resources were finite and human behavior unpredictable, such an approach was both humane and practical. The emotional resonance of the piano cannot be overstated. For many prisoners, hearing or playing music for the first time in months or even years was transformative. It provided moments of joy and comfort amidst the stark reality of war. The act of creating or listening to music allowed individuals to reconnect with their identities, reclaiming fragments of themselves lost to conflict. In a space dominated by barbed wire and armed oversight, a melody could temporarily dissolve walls of fear and mistrust. These fleeting moments had enduring effects, fostering bonds among prisoners and even between prisoners and guards, rooted in shared humanity rather than ideology. The decision to allow music also carried profound moral significance. War is often defined by dehumanization, yet in these barracks, officers made a conscious choice to recognize the prisoner's dignity. By providing opportunities for cultural engagement, they affirmed that enemy status did not negate human worth. The piano became a tangible expression of ethical leadership, showing that compassion and strategic thinking could coexist. This moral choice resonated far beyond the immediate moment, leaving lasting impressions on prisoners who would carry the memory of this gesture long after the war ended. Music, particularly piano music, has long held cultural importance in German households. Classical pieces, folk songs, and simple melodies were woven into daily life, marking holidays, family gatherings, and personal milestones. In the barracks, these familiar tunes offered more than aesthetic pleasure. They connected prisoners to a shared past, a culture that existed outside of defeat and captivity. The piano allowed women to reclaim cultural identity and, in subtle ways, resist the erasure imposed by imprisonment. In hearing or performing these pieces, they reaffirmed who they were, even as the world around them seemed intent on erasing their individuality. The psychological effects of the piano sessions were profound and multi-layered. Months of captivity, isolation, and uncertainty had worn down the prisoner's mental resilience. Depression, anxiety, and feelings of helplessness were common, intensified by the harsh winter, monotonous routines, and the constant knowledge of the war raging beyond the camp walls. Music provided an unexpected intervention. Even a few minutes of listening or playing allowed prisoners to redirect attention from fear toward creativity, memory, and emotional release. Cognitive studies in later decades would validate what the camp officers had observed intuitively. Engagement with music can lower stress, reduce anxiety, and foster social cohesion. In the barracks, each note struck was a small but tangible restoration of mental well-being. For women who had endured emotional and physical hardships, the piano became a lifeline, offering structure, solace, and a temporary reprieve from the constant pressure of imprisonment. From the prisoner's perspective, the piano also complicated the traditional dichotomy of enemy and ally. These German women, trained to view Americans as adversaries in a global conflict, were confronted with an act of trust and benevolence. At first, skepticism and fear dominated. Was this a trap? A surveillance tactic? Over time, however, repeated sessions and the consistent respect of the guards began to reshape perceptions. Music humanized the captors, demonstrating that not all interactions with the enemy were rooted in violence or coercion. This subtle transformation had long-term significance. The women began to recognize the capacity for empathy, even in wartime, altering how they internalized captivity and interacted with those overseeing their daily lives. The piano also fostered social cohesion among the prisoners themselves. In a setting defined by hierarchy, scarcity, and tension, music created a shared space where individuals could bond. Group improvisations, the teaching of familiar tunes to others, or simply listening together, offered opportunities for solidarity. Through music, differences in age, background, and pre-war experience became secondary to the shared act of participation. The piano transformed a barracks of isolated individuals into a community of temporary collaborators, a microcosm of society under extraordinary circumstances. These interactions, while small in scale, carried significant emotional weight, reinforcing the idea that cultural and emotional expression could survive even in captivity. The piano moment also invites reflection on broader ethical questions. How do small gestures of humanity resonate within the machinery of war? How can empathy persist in situations designed to strip away individuality? Allowing prisoners access to music was not merely a recreational policy. It was a statement about human dignity. The ethical resonance of these sessions extended beyond the camp walls, influencing how prisoners remembered the Americans who oversaw them and, in turn, how these women approached post-war reconciliation. The act of playing and listening to music became a form of moral diplomacy, illustrating that kindness, even in limited forms, can leave an enduring imprint on history. Music also functioned as a bridge across cultural divides. The repertoire played by prisoners often included German folk tunes, classical works by Beethoven or Bach, or improvisations that reflected personal memories. By allowing and even encouraging this cultural expression, American officers fostered an environment in which identity could coexist with captivity. The piano, thus, became an instrument of subtle reconciliation, a recognition that enemies could retain their humanity, and that cultural heritage could survive even amidst conflict. These sessions offered the women a space to reclaim their cultural selfhood, validating personal identity in a setting designed to neutralize it. Finally, the piano's presence shaped the long-term memory of those who experienced it. Many former prisoners recalled these sessions decades later as defining moments of their captivity, not because of grand gestures or heroic interventions, but because of the simplicity and sincerity of music. The piano became emblematic of resilience, a testament to the endurance of hope, and a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, small acts of humanity could leave lasting impressions. These memories would later inform post-war narratives, memoirs, and historical accounts, highlighting the unexpected ways in which cultural engagement could influence the human experience of war. It was mid-January 1945, a week after a fresh layer of snow had sealed the camp in a cold silence. The barracks were quiet, the usual hum of chores replaced by a brittle stillness. Then the sound arrived, delicate, tentative, almost impossibly out of place. A single note from the upright piano standing awkwardly in the corner of the hall. At first, the German women froze, instinctively drawing back from the instrument as if expecting a reprimand or worse. The guards watched silently, hands folded, faces neutral, allowing the moment to unfold without interference. The first piece played was simple, a slow, familiar German folk tune. It began hesitantly, each note measured and uncertain, yet with a warmth that filled the barracks. The women's reactions were immediate and visceral. Some pressed hands to their mouths, eyes wide with disbelief, as if afraid the melody was a trick of the imagination. Others inched closer, drawn to the piano by a memory of childhood, family gatherings, or long-forgotten lessons. One young prisoner, barely 17, whispered a fragment of a song under her breath, hesitant yet yearning to join. As the days passed, the sessions grew bolder. The piano became a central fixture of the barracks' life, a locus of quiet fascination. Some of the women began experimenting, timid fingers pressing keys with uncertainty at first, then with increasing confidence. Tunes ranged from classical pieces to improvised melodies, evoking nostalgia, longing, and fleeting joy. Laughter occasionally punctuated the music, an unexpected sound in a place otherwise dominated by monotony and fatigue. The piano transformed the atmosphere. Where silence had reigned, now there was dialogue between memory and reality, fear and comfort, captivity and fleeting freedom. The American officers observed these moments carefully, noting subtle but significant shifts. Tension eased among the prisoners. Disciplinary incidents decreased, and cooperation increased. Music created a shared experience that transcended rank, age, and background. Even the guards were affected. Some paused during their rounds to listen, others offered quiet encouragement, reinforcing the unspoken trust forming within the barracks. The piano had become a bridge, connecting the captors and the captured in a fragile but undeniable human bond. Individual stories emerged, each illustrating the transformative power of music. One older woman, a former music teacher, began guiding younger prisoners in basic technique, teaching them scales, chords, and simple songs. Another, whose family had lived in the Bavarian countryside, improvised melodies reminiscent of winter evenings by the hearth. These acts of instruction and collaboration fostered a sense of community, transforming the barracks into a space of shared culture and mutual respect, however temporary. Tensions still lingered, of course. Some prisoners remained suspicious, questioning why the Americans would permit such liberties. Wartime indoctrination and fear were not easily erased. Yet, with each note struck, the barriers of distrust eroded incrementally. By the third week of piano sessions, most women had participated in some form, listening, playing, teaching, or harmonizing. The barracks no longer felt solely like a place of confinement. It had become, for short stretches of time, a space of possibility, creativity, and human connection. The turning point was subtle but unmistakable. The piano had started as an anomaly, a strange intrusion into the regimented life of a POW camp, but it evolved into a locus of transformation. Emotions that had been suppressed for months surfaced through the music. Bonds formed not through ideology, hierarchy, or duty, but through melody and rhythm. The women experienced a profound reminder that, even in captivity, they retained agency over their emotional and cultural lives. The piano did not end the war, nor did it erase fear or homesickness, but it reframed the prisoners' experience. A small instrument had created a profound shift in morale, identity, and perception, leaving an imprint that would endure far beyond the walls of the barracks. As January gave way to February 1945, the piano sessions became more than isolated incidents. They evolved into a central rhythm of life within the camp. Word spread quickly. The barracks, where the upright piano stood, had become a rare sanctuary, a place where fear and monotony gave way to curiosity and fragile joy. Women from other sections of the camp began to request permission to participate, bringing their own memories, songs, and voices. The piano became a shared canvas, a means of expression that transcended the strict boundaries imposed by captivity. The atmosphere during these sessions was electric in a quiet, restrained way. The first notes were always tentative, a cautious probe into uncharted emotional territory. But as confidence grew, the melodies became bolder, richer, and more intricate. Some women performed classical pieces they had learned in youth. Others improvised simple tunes evoking distant memories of home. Occasionally, harmonies overlapped, creating spontaneous ensembles that resonated across the barracks. Laughter, gasps of surprise, and soft murmurs of recognition punctuated the music, infusing the space with warmth previously unimaginable within barbed wire walls. The guards, initially observers, began to recognize the session's transformative power. Rather than merely tolerating the activity, many officers encouraged participation, moving aside to give space, or quietly applauding after particularly skillful performances. The relationship between captor and captive shifted subtly but significantly. Suspicion gave way to cautious trust, not rooted in ideology or convenience, but in shared acknowledgement of a moment that was deeply human. Even the most skeptical prisoners gradually allowed themselves to relax, drawn into the rhythm of the music and the communal experience it fostered. Several stories illustrate the depth of this transformation. One young woman, isolated for months and rarely speaking to others, was coaxed into playing a simple scale. Her trembling fingers slowly gained confidence, and by the end of the session, she had performed a brief folk melody. Tears glistened in her eyes, a mixture of pride and relief. Another, a former choir singer, led a small group in harmonizing a familiar German hymn, creating a moment of collective memory and emotional catharsis. These acts, small as they seemed, reinforced bonds among prisoners, creating micro-communities within the camp walls. The piano also became a vehicle for subtle psychological resilience. Music allowed prisoners to process fear, grief, and longing, offering a temporary escape from the harsh reality of war. Notes became a language of memory and identity, enabling women to assert agency over their emotional lives. Even guards observed the effects. Prisoners who had been withdrawn or tense displayed greater cooperation and emotional stability after participating in sessions. The piano, though physically modest, wielded extraordinary influence over the atmosphere of the camp. Beyond individual and communal impact, the sessions hinted at a larger truth about human nature. In the midst of conflict, hierarchy, and fear, music could create fleeting but profound bridges between people. The barriers of language, nationality, and ideology softened under the simple power of melody. Captor and captive, young and old, novice and skilled musician, all found themselves united in shared experience. In a war dominated by destruction and division, these moments of connection were extraordinary precisely because they were unexpected, fragile, and intensely human. By early February, the piano's influence extended beyond the barracks in which it sat. Guards reported a measurable improvement in morale, reduced tension during work details, and increased willingness among prisoners to engage in camp routines. Letters from home, when they arrived, sometimes mentioned the sessions, and accounts circulated through the camp about the piano that could make you forget the barbed wire. The instrument had become emblematic not just of music, but of resilience, humanity, and the capacity for hope in a setting designed to strip both away. In the weeks following the piano sessions, the immediate effects on the camp were unmistakable. The atmosphere shifted subtly but palpably. Where tension and monotony had previously dominated, a sense of cautious optimism now pervaded the barracks. Prisoners who had been withdrawn, reluctant to speak or interact, began to engage more with one another. Simple gestures, sharing a tune, offering guidance on a melody, laughing at a minor mistake, became common. The piano had not just entertained, it had created a framework for social cohesion within a world defined by isolation and hierarchy. American officers took note of these changes. Reports filed to higher command highlighted a marked decrease in disciplinary incidents and an increase in cooperative behavior. Guards observed that women who participated in music sessions were calmer during daily routines, more punctual in tasks, and generally more communicative. The sessions became a practical tool in camp management. Music functioned as both morale booster and social stabilizer. Officers recognized that such initiatives, while small in scale, produced significant benefits for maintaining order and upholding humane standards of treatment. Letters and diaries from the prisoners provide glimpses into their personal experiences. One woman wrote, "The piano is strange here, yet it feels like a piece of home. For a few moments, I forget where I am, and I am just a girl playing a song I knew as a child." Another recalled, "When the notes filled the room, I felt lighter, as if the barbed wire had softened, if only for an hour." These reflections, recorded contemporaneously, illustrate the deep emotional resonance of the piano sessions. It was not merely entertainment. It was a lifeline, a thread connecting them to their humanity and past lives. The spread of the piano's influence extended beyond the initial barracks. Prisoners from neighboring sections requested access, and some sessions became small, informal gatherings attended by multiple groups. In certain cases, guards permitted these cross-barracks interactions, recognizing that fostering positive engagement contributed to overall morale. While never large-scale concerts, these gatherings allowed women to perform for peers, share cultural knowledge, and experience a sense of accomplishment rare in the regimented environment of a POW camp. The practical impact of these sessions also extended to camp logistics. Officers reported that prisoners involved in music were generally more cooperative with administrative tasks and less likely to challenge authority. Morale, often difficult to quantify, was visibly improved. Daily routines, which had previously been endured with resignation, became punctuated by anticipation for the next piano session. The instrument had transformed from a novelty into a cornerstone of psychological and social strategy within the camp. Yet, Despite the positive changes, the piano was also a reminder of what had been lost. Each note evoked memories of family, home, and life before war. For some, this sparked longing or sadness, an acute awareness of displacement and separation. The duality of music, simultaneously comforting and bittersweet, underscored its emotional potency. It reminded prisoners that even as they experienced fleeting joy, the harsh realities of captivity and conflict remained. Contemporary accounts and post-war interviews confirmed the lasting impression these sessions left on those who experienced them. Prisoners frequently cited the piano as a highlight of their captivity, a symbol of small but significant acts of humanity. For the American officers, the success of this initiative validated the broader approach to POW management. That adherence to international law, combined with thoughtful, humane engagement, could improve conditions, reduce tension, and foster mutual respect, even in a context defined by conflict. The long-term effects of the piano sessions extended far beyond the immediate camp environment. For the German female prisoners, the memories of those melodies lingered long after liberation and repatriation. Former prisoners recalled the sessions decades later with remarkable clarity, describing them as moments of relief, joy, and emotional restoration amidst the monotony and hardship of captivity. In memoirs and interviews, the piano was often cited not just as a source of entertainment, but as a symbol of resilience, cultural identity, and human dignity preserved under extraordinary circumstances. One former prisoner reflected, "In that barracks, the piano was more than wood and strings. It was a piece of life that they could not take from us, no matter the war." The influence of the piano also extended to the broader perception of American POW practices. Officers' deliberate encouragement of cultural and recreational activities demonstrated a commitment to humane treatment that contrasted sharply with some other wartime practices. Music became emblematic of a philosophy that viewed prisoners not merely as enemy combatants, but as human beings with emotional, social, and cultural needs. Historians later noted that such initiatives contributed to post-war reconciliation by leaving a lasting impression on prisoners, shaping how they remembered their captors and how they approached the post-war world. Beyond the individual and institutional impact, the sessions revealed the enduring power of culture in times of conflict. Music served as a conduit for memory, identity, and social connection, illustrating that even amidst the structure and discipline of a POW camp, human creativity could flourish. The piano allowed prisoners to reclaim aspects of themselves that the war sought to suppress, their skills, memories, and sense of emotional autonomy. This reclaiming of personal and cultural space was a subtle yet profound act of resistance against the dehumanizing effects of war. Sessions also had broader emotional and philosophical implications for those involved. Guards who witnessed the transformations often described a new awareness of the humanity of the prisoners. The recognition that enemy soldiers, and, in this case, women who had been indoctrinated by wartime propaganda, could experience joy, sadness, and longing in the same ways as themselves, fostered empathy. This shared humanity subtly shifted the social dynamics within the camp, contributing to a more humane and respectful environment. Even decades later, the memory of these sessions influenced cultural narratives about the war. They became examples of how small, intentional acts of kindness and engagement could ripple outward, leaving lasting impressions. Music, a seemingly simple act, demonstrated that the human spirit could endure even in circumstances defined by fear, control, and confinement. The piano was more than an instrument, it became a symbol of hope, a reminder that empathy and culture could survive amid the machinery of war. The final consequence of these sessions lies in their place within historical memory. They serve as a testament to the power of art and culture as tools for psychological resilience, moral leadership, and cross-cultural understanding. While the war itself was defined by violence, destruction, and division, the piano sessions represent moments of connection that transcended those boundaries. They remind historians and audiences alike that human experiences of war are not solely measured by battles and strategy, but by the quieter, profound acts that sustain morale, identity, and dignity. In the frozen barracks of a 1945 POW camp, a piano sang, and for a brief moment, the war receded. The notes, delicate and defiant, carried more than melody. They carried humanity. In a world dominated by orders, barbed wire, and fear, a simple act of music transformed lives, reshaped relationships, and offered a glimpse of hope. The German female prisoners, once reduced to numbers and routines, found themselves remembered not only as captives, but as individuals capable of feeling, creating, and connecting. The piano sessions remind us that war is not only fought on battlefields, but also within hearts and minds. Human resilience can persist in the smallest of gestures, a melody, a shared song, or an invitation to participate. Music became a bridge across enmity, a language unbound by ideology, nationality, or circumstance. It demonstrated that even in captivity, dignity, identity, and emotion could survive, nurtured by acts of empathy and cultural understanding. For the American officers, allowing music was both practical and profoundly moral. It eased tensions, reinforced cooperation, and maintained order. But it was also a conscious affirmation that compassion could coexist with authority. History often remembers battles, strategy, and conquest. Yet moments like these endure in memory precisely because they illuminate the quieter truths of war. That kindness, artistry, and shared humanity matter, even when the world seems consumed by destruction. Decades later, survivors still recall the piano, the laughter, the tears, the fragile joy it brought. Its echoes are more than notes. They are a testament to endurance, hope, and the irrepressible capacity for human connection. In the midst of conflict, the piano proved that war need not erase culture, empathy, or the simple beauty of shared experience. It stands as a reminder that history is not only shaped by armies, weapons, and battles, but by the quiet, transformative acts that reaffirm what it means to be human.